G'day guys, Jason in the Udder Farm. What I want to discuss today guys is the controversial subject of greenhouse gases, cattle and global warming. I was on the internet and a few concerning headlines come up. One was reducing methane's emission is seen as the biggest opportunity for slowing down global heating by 2040. Another one I found was, why are cows bad for the environment and what can we do? I won't beat around the bush guys, I'm going to go straight into the facts on cattle. So I went out and done my due diligence guys. I just didn't rattle these off my head, so I looked up several sites when I researched, and the one I like, and it's pretty well consistent across the board, is I picked the one from UC Davies, which is the University of California for those who don't know. They examine the bad rap cattle as an unfriendly producer of the climate, changing greenhouse gases. Number one fact is cattle are the number one agricultural source of greenhouse gases worldwide. A single cow will belch about 220 pounds of methane per year. Methane from cattle is short-lived when compared to carbon dioxide, but it's 28 times more potent in warming the atmosphere. Whilst livestock in general are only responsible for 14.5% of the total greenhouse gases, cows and ruminant animals account for just 4% of all the greenhouse gases in the United States, that is. Beef cattle, just 2% of direct emissions. Better breeding and genetics and nutrition have made livestock more efficient in production in the US. It used to take, in the 70s, 140 million head of cattle to produce the same amount of meat that we're producing now from 90 million head. UC Davies also have multiple projects on the go around the world. They're looking at trying to boost livestock productivity through better nutrition. And we're also looking at better ways of making the cow more sustainable and less gassy by way of natural supplement. In one of the trials, they incorporated seaweed into their diet. And at the end of the trial, they found out they could reduce 60% of the methane's emission by just incorporating 1% of seaweed into their diet. And besides the greenhouse gases, the beef production industry are constantly getting ridiculed heavily for the amount of land they take up. They're saying they're overgrazing, which is destroying the soil health, depleting the biodiversity, and causing desertification across the world. Show me one farmer out there who is intentionally trying to overgraze his property, deplete the soil, and also lessen or ruin the amount of diversity he's got on his property, as well as trying to cause desertification. There won't be one, guys. At the end of the day, it's their livelihood, it's their family's livelihood that he succeeds to put bread on the table and food in their mouths. It's all through education is why they're not doing it. They don't know any better. I only found out about regenerative farming 2.5 years ago when I was in COVID isolation. Before that, I was continual grazing. I was one of those farmers. It's handed down through generations and generations. Your dad, your granddad, that was the way it was done. This is the way you do it because it's the way it's always been done. And that's the worst trait you can get into, guys. We need to push the education on regenerative farming, get the word out there. Farmers would be happily to change if they knew was a better way of doing it. Who wouldn't want a fatter animal and healthier? Because you've got less chemicals, less drenching of them. Healthier, fatter animal, thicker and longer pastures, but you're also holding the moisture in the ground longer, so you grow the recovery time's faster, as you all know, and you're holding the soil on your property. There's less inputs. You're not putting chemical fertilizers down, synthetic fertilizers, or the amount of inputs on the cattle with chemicals to kill the parasites. It's the way to go. They just don't know. They've got to be shown there's a better way. Once shown, they're going to have more profit in their pocket into the bottom dollar. There'll be less inputs onto the property because they're using a hell of a lot less consumables in the way of chemicals and poisons and fertilizers and machinery. But the best feeling I get out of all is I'm now got rid of my old practices, which was adding to global warming. continual grazing, the ground was hot. I'm now making a better environment for my kids and their kids' kids and beyond, as well as having more money in my pocket at the end of the day. Can the same be said for factory farms and commercial feedlots? They are intentionally set up to mass produce, pumping them in, pumping them out. It was estimated in 2019 that 99% of farmed animals in the USA lived on these factory farms. For cows, it was over 70.4% lived on these factory farms in confined, filthy, crowded indoor sheds, not allowed to graze and definitely not allowed to nurse their calves. They also weren't allowed to socialise with herds. These inhumane living conditions weren't just for cattle, it was for all livestock. They were adding to pollution, the animal waste, the methane gas. They definitely weren't sequestering carbon like we do here on the property and putting it into the soil on the plant. These were concrete floors, and which directly impacts the planet and the contamination of the air and the waterways and the land. On average, 86% of the people surveyed in 2020 for the Statista Global Consumer Survey of 39 countries around the world said their diet contained meat. You know, despite the fact and the trend at the moment of meat substitutes and plant-based products, eating meat still remains the norm in most countries around the world. You know, and there's no different here, guys. Last night it was grass-fed T-bones for us, and tonight it's chicken. Though livestock production impacts the climate, though from the percentages from the survey we realise that meat isn't going anywhere soon. The regenerative agriculture movement recognise this, but they also recognise the many benefits of properly managed livestock grazing, which includes carbon sequestration, restoring the topsoil, improving the ecosystem's biodiversity, and reducing the uses of pesticides, herbicides and synthetic fertiliser inputs, whilst also producing a more nutritionally dense food. Though we haven't our heads in the sand neither. Whilst sustainable grazing practices won't eliminate methane being emitted by cows, the question remains, can cattle be raised, fed, slaughtered in a way that reduces greenhouse gas emissions to a tolerable level? A 5-year study published in 2018 in the Journal of Agricultural Systems suggests we can. Conducted by Michigan State University and unions concerned scientists suggested that if cattle are managed in a certain way, especially in the finishing phase, grass-fed beef can be carbon negative in the short term and carbon neutral in the long term. Whilst the University of California, Berkeley, states it is possible that the long-term adaptive multi-paddock grazing finishing could contribute considerably more to climate change mitigation and adaptation than previously thought. The Michigan State study was carried out on their own grazing lands with a herd of adult cattle. That was their test population. Our own Dr. Christine Jones, a soil ecologist here in Australia, also recognises the importance that livestock can play in mitigating climate control, and she agrees with the MSU papers, but she also goes on record in stating that a good adaptive multi-paddock grazing system provides countless other ecosystem services, including, you know, improving biodiversity, erosion control, increasing soil water holding capability, and greater drought resilience. For those of you who don't know what carbon sequestration is, there's 3 categories of carbon sequestering, and the one we're talking about here for agriculture is biological carbon sequestration, and it's the storage of carbon dioxide in vegetation as well as grasslands, forest, and the soil as well as the ocean. So when we're talking about balancing out to carbon negative or carbon neutral, we're talking about that what the methane the animals produce against what we are sequestering in the vegetation or storing in the ground equals itself out. Or if it's in a negative state, we're actually sequestering more carbon dioxide and putting it in the ground and vegetation than methane, the amount of methane the cows are producing. So to obtain carbon neutral or carbon negative, we're talking about you need to hold your animals on your property through the 3 stages, through birth and nurturing, up through growth, and up through maturity, just before slaughter. See, if you're feeding them grain, or they're in feedlots, or they're on these factory farms, there's no way you can get to carbon negative. You won't even get close to carbon neutral, because you're not sequestering any carbon into the ground through the plants or holding it in vegetation like farmlands. It's all concrete. So like I said, guys, I done my due diligence on this subject. They weren't facts that I made up, and I researched all weekend before I made this video. You know, I went through multiple papers, and the majority from scientists and doctors are saying it's possible. It have to be 80% saying that it is doable to counter-react the amount of methane put out there through carbon sequester and store it in the ground. You know, like there are several papers that I said that said it's not possible. But one of them was from a well-known vegan online. You know, I'm not sure where he got his information from, so he's obviously found one somewhere for his studies, but like I said, the majority overrule and balance, saying that yes, it is possible and it's doable. So as regenerative farmers, we've had to go through a total mind shift. We've altered our management skills and a train of thoughts. We used to just consider ourselves graziers or pasture managers, but really boils down to we're all microbe farmers or microbe ranchers. We're managing the microbes, because without the microbes you won't have pasture, and without the pasture you won't have your livestock. So at the end of the day, without microbes there's no future. Our livestock are an invaluable tool. With careful regenerative farming management, these integral tools play a role in not only just assisting us in building back our environment and ecosystem on our farms, but they can also make a difference in reversing the effect of greenhouse gases. So should the headlines really be about livestock, cattle in particular? They didn't ask to be factory farmed on cement, live on cement all their life, individualized, isolated, or put into feedlots finished on grain for months on end, jam-packed in there so they can't move to put on weight. It really boils down to the management of the livestock. They should be held accountable, or at least education. There's people out there that don't even know there's better ways of doing it. I didn't know about regenerative farming just before COVID when I stumbled across it, and I've seen there was a better way of doing things. It's just been handed down through generations. Unless people are shown, they won't change. So the headline shouldn't be about the livestock or cattle. It should be about the management, the practices and systems in place. We need to show people, educate people that there's better ways of doing this. Otherwise it's not going to get any better. Righto guys, I think I'll jump off my soapbox now. I think I've said enough. Have a good morning, an awesome afternoon, and a terrific evening guys, wherever you're watching us from, and we'll catch you later.